We are 14 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Back in my day, and you have it easy. I think that young people hear all too often in our community at the moment the idea that things are easier for the younger generation today than when you were their age is something heard down the street, at family barbecues, anywhere, really. But what do we mean when we say the word youth? Stephen Threadgold from the University of Newcastle is here to explore this further. Good morning.
Morning, Guy. How are you going?
Good, thanks. Are we all guilty of this? Is even millennials now looking down on Gen Zs, being like, guys, come on?
Yeah, they really are. I mean, I had a PhD student do some interviews recently where he was talking to teenagers and they were talking about how, 5-year-olds now all have iPads and how jealous they are of that and how silly it is and all this kind of stuff. So it does seem to be a fairly constant generational thing that happens, yeah.
Why? What do we know about it? Why do we look down on the younger generations below us?
Well, I think it's for a lot of reasons. I think our youth is a really important time in our lives, and it's obviously when we kind of socialise, when we become the person we are for the rest of our life. And it's also where we're kind of really emotionally open, so it's kind of when we develop passions about popular culture and songs and movies, and you develop, deep friendships. And as you get older, you kind of maybe get a little more distance to that, you get more responsibilities, and then you look back at that time kind of through rose-coloured glasses. So, and I think what also happens is as you get older, you kind of lose touch with what's going on, the whole, the memes about, old man shaking fist at cloud and,
The term Karen.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. You kind of just lose touch with what's going on, and there's kind of, I think also, there's a bit of a resentment about that, and there's also the fact that as you get older, your life gets closer to the end and all that kind of thing. So this kind of stuff kind of seems to breed into this kind of intergenerational stuff, but it also happens, I think, through the media in particular. There's always really different, what I call figures of young people that are used in really different and contradictory ways, and I think that adds to this kind of relationships.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Well, for instance, in politics, you have all these kind of stereotypes of young people. On the one hand, when they're lazy and they're not interested in politics and they should care more about certain things and they're too busy, on their phones or whatever. But on the other hand, whenever young people protest about something, the reporting tends to be something like, they should be back in school concentrating on doing that kind of stuff and not worried about climate change or whatever. They tend to, when they do politics, apparently do it wrong. So this is constant contradictory kind of ways that the very idea of youth and young people in general are used to, tell stories in the media, but also this tends to be for fairly political ends, So that's in politics in particular, that's a thing. There's also the way that I think, young people are represented as kind of in their day-to-day lives. So on one hand, again, there's that kind of cultural dupe idea that they're too busy looking at their phones and listening to music. But on the other hand, the very image of youth is used to sell us stuff, the kind of sexy, edgy and cool. And so there's these constant contradictions in terms of how young people are represented. And this is also particularly about economics as well, where, apparently they eat too many avocados to be able to buy a house. Yet we all know that the labour market has been overtly casualised. It's harder and harder to get full-time, good-paying work until much later in life, let alone the fact that the housing market is just kind of so out of control. So there's these distortions, I think, of youth used to, I think, promote particular political ends, scapegoat young people, I think, for problems that they're not really responsible for sometimes.
Do you think, we keep saying, and I feel like I need a new way to say it, but 2020 has been one hell of a ride. It's been a very interesting year. Do you think the idea of some of these misconceptions around youth are being challenged with what we've seen in 2020 through both big global movements like Black Lives Matter, but also because our young people have been more, here we go, the older generation are getting ready to fire up at me, but young people have been affected quite severely by what we've seen through this pandemic as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, other research we've been doing about young people in the pandemic, for instance, that are working in hospitality, they are tend to face the brunt of the economic things greater than the general population because they tend to be in those kind of casualised jobs that are the first to kind of be cut. They're also in hospitality work where they're facing, public all the time, and they're also tend to take up a lot of the jobs in care work and stuff like that. So they're overexposed to the risks of the pandemic. So yeah, in research there, certainly we find that young people are more overexposed to the risks of the pandemic, and but that also is kind of a generality in a way too. That the young people that tend to have family support can cope better. The ones that don't have more risks, I suppose. So it's not just all young people are equally exposed, but as a group, they tend to be more exposed. Yeah.
Stephen, when do you know you're no longer a young person? What's that age cutoff that we're talking about here?
Well, that's a great question. The official categories of youth are kind of 15 to 25, or I think the UN's 15 to 28. And so more conceptually, youth is the idea, that kind of transitional period between being a kid, where you have like no responsibilities, to being an adult, where you have responsibilities. It's kind of used in our research for that period. But a lot of the research shows that the things that are kind of markers of adulthood, getting a full-time job, moving out of the family home and having your own place to live, getting a relationship and getting married and all that kind of stuff, is happening later and later and later. So well beyond 25, in fact, into the 40s, and some people aren't doing a lot of those things anymore. So that's a kind of interesting thing to question about what is youth. It becomes more of a concept, I think, than a time period, where you can feel young, I suppose, but might be older, and vice versa. Yeah.
I feel like we're all having that moment in our lives right now, about being like, I know that 55-year-old who is just still such a child.
Yeah. Well, that's a child, and that's an insult, right? But if you talk about them as young, it's kind of a little bit different, right? If you call them a child, you're saying they're childish.
Yeah.
If you call them a young, they might be like, fit and energetic or something. So yeah, these words kind of have different connotations, I think, when we kind of describe people like that.
Yeah, why should we all come together a little bit, realise that we have a lot of shared things between generations, and not start pointing the fingers at each other?
Well, that's a really good question too. A few reasons. I think firstly, the finger-pointing thing tends to kind of cover up what the real problems are in society. By blaming young people for, not being able to buy a house, it tends to cover up the fact that the housing market's out of control. So there's an obfuscation going on there about the reality of the world, when we tend to blame individuals or groups for, what are broader structural social problems.
Yeah.
I suppose more idealistically, it's, we should just all try and understand each other more and get along more. And maybe, it is a bit of a responsibility, I suppose, for older people to maybe try and understand the lives of young people more, because they do face a whole bunch of really different social circumstances than previous generations.
And I think vice versa. It's been really interesting this year to watch young people motivate themselves, but also rally themselves in the way that our grandparents did in the 60s.
Yeah, that's right. And there's like a huge uptake in social and political engagement, I think, in terms of, what you mentioned earlier on, Black Lives Matter, and climate change in particular is a real political topic that young people are interested in. So, yeah, that's right. I think, but, to be fair here, it also goes the other way. You have, young people tend to resent older people for all kinds of, sometimes distorted reasons as well, and the whole OK Boomer meme and that kind of stuff. So it tends to be this thing that kind of repeats itself over time. Back in the day, Aristotle was talking about how young people are no good. So it does seem to be something that happens a lot.
And I feel like
go up and down in intensity, I suppose.
I feel like you and I aren't going to change that just with this conversation today, unfortunately.
No, I think you're right there.
We've got a long way to go. Stephen, really great to catch up with you on this today. Before I let you go, though, I want to ask you about sibling rivalry. Was there some in your house, speaking of young people and young times and nostalgia about youth?
Look, not really. I think me and my sister largely ignored each other in our household and school times and stuff like that, until we kind of left school and got out of the house. And now, we're really good mates and we hang out all the time. So
yeah,
I think we've been pretty lucky like that. I can't really remember having kind of heaps of fights over things.
I feel like ignoring each other is like the ultimate sibling rivalry. It's just like, you know what, you're not even important enough for me to disagree with you on.
Yeah, that's right. I think we were just kind of, maybe sussing each other, worked on each other in for whatever dodgy things we might have been doing. But yeah, that's about it, really.
Stephen, great to catch up. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Kaya. Bye.
From the School of Humanities and Social Science at the University of Newcastle, Stephen Threadgold there talking through that idea of youth, of young people, of that generational divide that is as old as time, and I do think will continue to go for a lot longer. It's nearly time for the 10 o'clock news.